The stars had never looked so cold to Captain Jake Morrison as they did that morning. He stood on the bridge of the horizon's edge and watched the endless black stretch before him. His ship was not a warship. It was a civilian transport vessel, carrying diplomats and relief supplies between human colonies and the greater galaxy. The ship had basic shields and nothing more. They relied on treaties and council protection. They relied on laws that were supposed to keep them safe. Jake had been in space for 20 years now. He had seen the Galactic Council up close many times. The reptilian Vextar with their cold eyes and colder hearts. The crystalline luminari who spoke in riddles and looked down on younger races. The towering Krathis who measured worth in pure strength. They had let humanity join their council. But Jake always felt the contempt behind their diplomatic smiles. Humans were newcomers to the stars, 200 years among species that had traveled space for millennia. The council tolerated humanity because humans were useful, not because they were respected. His first officer, Grace Palmer, walked onto the bridge with 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Jake and took her station beside him. Grace had been with him for 5 years. She was the best officer he had ever worked with. Smart, calm under pressure, and fiercely loyal to their crew of 40 people who had become like family. "Morning, Captain," Grace said with a small smile. "Morning, Grace," Jake replied and took a sip of the coffee. It was terrible as always, but it was warm and familiar. The communication console beeped. Their comm officer, Danny Cruz, put the message on speakers. It was a distress call from Kepler Station, a neutral trading hub on the edge of Council space. The station reported a critical systems failure. They needed immediate assistance. Over 10,000 civilians were on that station from a dozen different species. Jake did not hesitate. "Set course for Kepler Station. Maximum speed." "Yes, sir," came the reply from the navigation station. The horizon's edge turned and jumped to hyperspace. The journey would take 6 hours. Jake used that time to check their medical supplies with Dr. Lisa Kent. She was their medical officer and had enough equipment to handle emergencies. The crew prepared for a rescue operation. Nobody questioned the decision to help. It was what they did. It was their duty. They dropped out of hyperspace near Kepler Station 6 hours later. Jake expected to see a station in crisis with failing lights and venting atmosphere. Instead, Kepler Station looked completely normal. Every light was on. The hull was intact. There was no visible damage at all. Grace frowned at her console. "Captain, something is wrong." "The station looks fine. Scan for life signs," Jake ordered. "Scanning now," Grace said. Her frown deepened. "Sir, I am reading normal life signs. The station appears fully operational." A chill ran down Jake's spine. "Back us off. Slow and steady." But before the helmsman could respond, Grace's console lit up with warnings. "Captain, the station's defense grid just activated. They are targeting us." "Raise shields," Jake said. "Open a channel to the station." Before the channel could open, space around them rippled. Ships decloaked all around the horizon's edge. 3 Vextar destroyers and 2 massive Krathis cruisers. They had been waiting. This was not a rescue. This was a trap. Jake's hands gripped the armrests of his chair. "Hail them now!" The main screen flickered to life. A Vextar commander appeared. His scales were dark green and his eyes were like chips of black ice. Jake recognized him from intelligence briefings. Commander Zex Thule, a high-ranking officer in the Vextar fleet. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the Civilian Transport Horizon's Edge," Jake said, keeping his voice steady. "We are an unarmed vessel operating under Council protection treaties. We responded to a distress call." "What is the meaning of this?" Zexthel's lipless mouth curved into something that might have been a smile. "The Council has determined that humanity's expansion must end. You will serve as the message." The words hit Jake like a physical blow. "What?" "There has been no declaration of war. No diplomatic incident. We are civilians. Your own laws protect us." "Laws change," Zexthel said simply. "Humanity has grown too bold, too ambitious. The elder races have decided it is time to remind you of your place. Your deaths will teach your species humility." "You cannot do this," Grace said from beside Jake. Her voice was shaking with anger. "This is murder." "This is politics," Zexthel replied. Then he gave the order. "Open fire." The world exploded into chaos. Energy weapons lanced out from the Council ships. The horizon's edge shuddered as her shields took the first hits. Alarms screamed throughout the ship. Jake grabbed the comm. All hands, this is the captain. We are under attack. Proceed to escape pods immediately. This is not a drill. The engineering console exploded in sparks. Danny Cruz was thrown backward, his uniform on fire. Grace was already there with an extinguisher. The ship rocked again. Another hit. The shields were failing fast. Grace, get everyone to the escape pods, Jake ordered. Not without you, she said. That is an order, Lieutenant, Jake said. Grace looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded and ran for the door. She had to coordinate the evacuation. She had to save as many as she could. Jake stayed on the bridge, trying to keep the ship together long enough for his crew to escape. He rerouted power to the aft shields where the escape pods were launching. The Vextar ships adjusted their fire. They were targeting the pods. They were killing defenseless people floating in space, you monsters, Jake whispered. He watched on his console as pod after pod was destroyed. 17 crew members gone in flashes of light. Grace was trying to seal a hull breach on Deck 3 to buy time for others. The breach was too large. The section decompressed. Grace was gone. Danny Cruz had made it to engineering, trying to restart the engines for one last jump. The engine room took a direct hit. The explosion vaporized everything in a 300-meter radius. Danny was gone. Dr. Lisa Kent was in the medical bay, refusing to leave the injured. She transmitted a final message before her section was breached. Tell Earth what they did here. Tell them the Council started this. Tell them to make it right. Then static. The horizon's edge was breaking apart. Jake activated the command pod and launched. As his pod drifted away from his dying ship, he watched the Council vessels systematically destroy what remained. They were thorough. They were merciless. Of 40 crew members, only 7 pods had escaped the kill zone. 7 survivors out of 40, 33 dead. 33 people who had done nothing wrong except answer a distress call. A passing freighter found the survivors 8 hours later. The freighter captain was a grizzled trader named Chen who had no love for the Council. He pulled the pods aboard and gave them medical attention. Jake was burned across his left side and had 3 broken ribs, but he was alive. He sat in the freighter's medical bay and stared at nothing. Grace was dead. Danny was dead. Lisa was dead. 33 friends and colleagues were gone, murdered by the Council without cause or mercy. The freighter jumped to hyperspace, heading for the nearest human colony. Chen had already transmitted the news ahead. By the time they arrived, the entire human sphere would know what happened at Kepler Station. Jake's hands curled into fists. The Council thought they had sent a message. They thought they had put humanity in its place. They had no idea what they had just done. They had no idea what they had awakened. Humanity had been patient. Humanity had been diplomatic. Humanity had played by the Council's rules for 200 years. But the Council had just broken the one rule that mattered most. They had shed human blood without cause. They had murdered innocents. And for that, Jake knew with absolute certainty they would pay a price beyond their imagination. The news reached Earth 36 hours after the massacre at Kepler Station. Every screen across the planet showed the same images: debris floating in space, burned hull fragments that used to be the horizon's edge. The 7 survivors giving testimony from hospital beds. Captain Jake Morrison's face was on every news channel as he described how the Council had murdered his crew in cold blood. Earth had not seen this kind of anger in generations. People poured into the streets. They gathered outside government buildings and demanded action. The unified Earth government called an emergency session within hours. The military high command assembled in the war room deep beneath Geneva. Admiral Richard Hayes stood at the head of the table. He was 60 years old with gray hair and hard eyes that had seen 3 colonial wars. He was the supreme commander of the United Earth Fleet, and he had spent his entire career preparing for the day when humanity might have to fight for its survival. That day had come. Around the table sat the other commanders. Colonel Nathan Price headed Special Operations. He was a lean man with cold precision in everything he did. Commander Susan Wright ran Naval Intelligence. She was brilliant and ruthless in equal measure. There were a dozen other officers representing every branch of Earth's military. Gentlemen and ladies, Admiral Hayes began, the Council has committed an act of war. They murdered 33 civilians without provocation. They violated their own protection treaties. They did this to send us a message. What message is that, sir? Colonel Price asked. That we should know our place, Hayes said. His voice was ice. That we should be grateful for whatever scraps they throw us. That we should never forget the youngest race at their table. Commander Wright pulled up holographic displays. Our intelligence indicates this was planned at the highest levels of the Council. All three major races knew about it. The Vextar, the Luminary, and the Krathis. This was not a rogue commander. This was Council policy. The room fell silent. Everyone understood what that meant. This was not something that could be resolved through diplomacy. The Council had made their choice. Now humanity had to make theirs. Options? Hayes asked. We file a formal protest through diplomatic channels, one officer suggested. We demand reparations and a full investigation. Hayes shook his head. They will ignore it or offer token apologies. Next option? Economic sanctions, another officer said. We cut off trade. We make them hurt financially. They have a dozen other species to trade with, Commander Wright said. Sanctions will hurt us more than them. Colonel Price leaned forward. There's only one option that makes sense. We go to war. Full mobilization. We hit them hard and we hit them fast before they can prepare. Several officers began talking at once. Some agreed. Some called it suicide. The Council had dozens of species and thousands of ships. Humanity had colonies scattered across 100 systems, but their fleet was dwarfed by Council numbers. Admiral Hayes raised his hand and silence fell. Colonel Price is correct. War is our only option, not because we want it, but because the alternative is extinction. The Council has shown us they are willing to murder civilians to keep us in line. If we do not respond with overwhelming force, they will do this again and again until humanity is broken or destroyed. Sir, we cannot win a conventional war against the entire Council. An officer protested. Hayes smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Who said anything about conventional war? Humanity has been preparing for this possibility since the day we met the Council. We have contingencies they do not know about. We have weapons they have never seen. We have been playing the role of grateful junior partners for 200 years. That was always a mask. Now we take it off. Commander Wright activated more displays. Project Hellfire is ready. We have kinetic bombardment satellites positioned in 17 Council systems. They have been there for years, dormant and undetectable. Project Phantom is operational, Colonel Price added. We have 40 stealth ships that can operate deep in Council space without being detected. They are already in position. Project Ragnarok, Hayes said quietly. The weapon we hoped we would never have to use. It is ready as well. Around the table, faces went pale. Everyone knew what Ragnarok was. It was humanity's final insurance policy, a weapon designed to crack planets. It had never been tested at full power because the simulations were too terrifying. But it existed and it was ready. We will not start by using Ragnarok, Hayes said firmly. But the Council needs to know we have it. They need to understand that if they push us to the brink, we will take them with us. The vote was unanimous. Earth would go to war. Within 24 hours, the orders went out. Every shipyard in the solar system shifted to military production. Civilian factories retooled to build weapons and ammunition. The fleet began to mobilize. Ships that had been patrolling trade routes were recalled. Reserves were activated. Colonies were put on high alert. The call went out across human space. Every person with military training was asked to return to service. Farmers who had fought in colonial skirmishes came back. Engineers who had served on warships came back. Even retired officers decades out of uniform came back. They came back because this was not just Earth's fight. This was humanity's fight. On Mars, Captain Jake Morrison lay in a hospital bed watching the news. His burns were healing slowly. The doctor said he would recover fully with time. But Jake did not want time. He wanted to be out there. He wanted to make the Council pay for what they did to Grace and Danny and Lisa, and the 30 others. Admiral Hayes came to visit him personally. The old admiral sat beside Jake's bed and they talked for an hour. Hayes told him about the war that was coming. He told him about the plans and the weapons and the terrible things humanity was about to do. I need experienced officers, Hayes said. I need people who have seen what the Council is capable of. I need people who understand what we are fighting for. I want back in, Jake said immediately. You are still recovering, Hayes pointed out. I do not care, Jake said. His voice was hard. They killed my crew. They killed my friends. I want to be there when we hit them back. Hayes studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded. You will have command of a strike squadron as soon as you are cleared for duty. I promise you will have a front row seat. In secret facilities across the solar system, scientists worked around the clock. They activated weapons systems that had been theoretical for decades. They ran final tests on equipment that had never seen combat. They prepared humanity's arsenal for total war. On Earth, families said goodbye to sons and daughters heading to the fleet. Children too young to fight watched their parents leave. The elderly who remembered the last great war shook their heads sadly. They had hoped humanity had moved beyond such things, but the Council had made that impossible. In the Council chambers far across the galaxy, the elder races discussed the situation. The Vextar were confident. Humanity would protest and rage but ultimately submit. The Luminari calculated the odds and saw human defeat as inevitable. The Krathis prepared their fleets for what they assumed would be a quick, punitive campaign. None of them understood what was coming. None of them realized they had made the worst mistake in galactic history. They had attacked humanity's civilians. They had shed innocent blood. They had declared war on a species that was very good at pretending to be civilized, but was absolutely terrifying when pushed to violence. The Council had 200 years of experience with diplomatic humans. They had no experience with humanity at war. They were about to learn the difference. 6 weeks after Kepler Station, the human fleet completed its mobilization. 200 warships gathered at rally points across human space. Thousands of fighters and bombers were loaded onto carriers. Marines boarded assault ships. Special operations teams infiltrated Council space aboard Phantom vessels. Admiral Hayes stood on the bridge of the UES Retribution, humanity's newest and most powerful dreadnought. Around him, his officers prepared for the first strike. Captain Jake Morrison had been cleared for duty and given command of the 7th Strike Squadron. He was out there now in the fleet, ready to lead his ships into battle. Hayes looked at the tactical display showing enemy positions. The Vextar home system, the system where Commander Zexthal had given the order to fire on the horizon's edge. That would be the first target. Not just a military strike, but a message. You started this war by killing our people. We will finish it by destroying your worlds. All ships report ready, sir, his executive officer said. Hayes took a breath. What he was about to do would change the galaxy forever. There would be no going back from this. But the Council had left humanity no choice. They wanted war. They would get more war than they ever imagined possible. Begin the operation, Admiral Hayes ordered. Jump on my mark, 3, 2, 1 mark. The human fleet vanished into hyperspace. When they emerged, the Council would learn what it meant to awaken Earth's fury. The Vextar home system of Zexus Prime had never been attacked in 3,000 years. It was one of the most heavily fortified systems in Council space. Defense platforms orbited the planet in 3 overlapping rings. A permanent fleet of 200 warships patrolled the system at all times. Ground-based weapons could target anything that came within range. The Vextar considered their homeworld absolutely safe. They were wrong. The human fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the system. 200 ships appeared in perfect formation like an iron wall. At the center was the UES Retribution with Admiral Richard Hayes on the bridge. Flanking the main fleet were strike squadrons led by newly promoted Captain Jake Morrison. His flagship was the UES Defiant, a sleek destroyer built for speed and firepower. The Vextar defense fleet scrambled immediately. Alarms blared across Zexus Prime. Commanders shouted orders. Ships that had been on patrol broke formation and raced toward the human fleet. The defense platforms activated their weapons. Ground batteries locked onto targets. Within minutes, the Vextar had mobilized their entire defensive force. They outnumbered the humans 3 to 1. They had superior defensive positions. They had home field advantage. Every Vextar commander was confident this would be a short battle. These humans had no idea what they were facing. Then the drones hit. The first wave was not ships at all. It was thousands of small autonomous drones, each no bigger than a fighter craft. They poured out of the human carriers like angry insects. The Vextar fleet opened fire immediately, destroying drone after drone. It was target practice. The drones had no shields and minimal armor. They died by the hundreds, but there were thousands of them. The Vextar fleet wasted ammunition and energy destroying the swarm, while the human ships moved into optimal firing positions. By the time the last drone was destroyed, the human fleet was exactly where Admiral Hayes wanted them to be. All ships, Hayes said calmly into the fleet channel, execute firing plan Alpha. The human fleet opened fire in perfect synchronization. Railguns launched tungsten slugs at a fraction of light speed. Missiles streaked through the void. Energy weapons lanced out in coordinated patterns. But they were not targeting ships. They were targeting the defense platforms and communication nodes. Commander Susan Wright's intelligence had done its job perfectly. She had mapped every satellite, every relay, every command center. The human fleet knew exactly where to shoot. Within 30 seconds, the Vextar defense network went blind and deaf. Ships could not coordinate. Ground batteries could not get targeting data. Commanders could not communicate with each other. The Vextar fleet found itself fighting in chaos. Individual captains had to make decisions without orders. Some charged forward. Some held position. Some tried to retreat and regroup. There was no unified strategy anymore. Captain Jake Morrison led his strike squadron through the confusion like sharks through blood. His weapons officer, Kyle Parker, had perfect aim. Every shot from the Defiant hit exactly where it needed to. His navigator, Amy Foster, threaded them through enemy formations at speeds that should have been impossible. His chief engineer, Ben Clark, kept their systems running beyond their rated capacity. Morrison's squadron targeted the Vextar capital ships. The big dreadnoughts and battleships were powerful but slow. Morrison's destroyers were fast and agile. They struck from angles the Vextar did not expect and vanished before return fire could track them. Within the first hour, Morrison's squadron had crippled 2 dreadnoughts and destroyed 3 cruisers. But the real devastation came from above. Project Hellfire had been humanity's secret for 5 years. Satellites hidden in deep orbit around key council worlds. They were small and cold and completely passive. They looked like space junk on sensors. The council had no idea they were weapons. Now they activated. Tungsten rods the size of telephone poles dropped from orbit. They had no engines and no guidance systems. They simply fell. Gravity accelerated them to incredible speeds. By the time they hit the atmosphere, they were moving at several kilometers per second. The impacts on military installations across Zexus Prime registered as small nuclear explosions. Kinetic energy turned into heat and shock waves. Shipyards vanished in fireballs. Command centers were obliterated. Weapons factories were reduced to craters. The Vextar had shields designed to stop energy weapons and missiles. Those shields did nothing against solid matter moving at relativistic speeds. The Vextar fleet watched in horror as their homeworld burned. Columns of fire rose into the atmosphere. Mushroom clouds spread across military districts. Everything they had built for national defense was being systematically destroyed. Commander Zexthul himself was in the fleet, commanding a battle group from his flagship. He stared at the tactical display in disbelief. This was not how the battle was supposed to go. The humans were supposed to break against Vextar defenses. They were supposed to learn their lesson and retreat. Instead, they were winning. All ships concentrate fire on their flagship, Zexthul ordered. Destroy the Retribution. The Vextar fleet tried to follow orders, but they were scattered and disorganized. Some ships moved to engage the Retribution. Others were still fighting Morrison's strike squadrons. Still others were trying to protect the orbital space above Zexus Prime. The human fleet adapted instantly. Ships that were threatened fell back behind screening vessels. Damaged ships withdrew while fresh ones took their place. The humans fought like a single organism, each part supporting the others. 4 hours into the battle, the Vextar fleet was broken. Half their ships were destroyed or disabled. The survivors were scattered across the system. The defense platforms were gone. The ground installations were rubble. Zexus Prime's military might had been shattered in a single afternoon. Admiral Hayes gave the order to withdraw. The human fleet began pulling back in good order. They had achieved every objective, but Hayes was not done. He had one more message to deliver. He opened a broadcast on every frequency. His face appeared on screens across Zexus Prime and throughout the Council network. Every Vextar, every Luminari, every Krathis could see him. Every species in the Council heard his words. "This is Admiral Richard Hayes of the United Earth Fleet," he began. His voice was calm and cold as the void itself. The Galactic Council murdered 33 human civilians at Kepler Station. You did this without provocation. You did this without mercy. You did this to teach humanity our place in your galaxy. On Zexus Prime, millions of Vextar watched their burning cities and listened to the human admiral. "This is our response," Hayes continued. "For every human you kill, we will destroy a world. For every act of aggression, we will respond with overwhelming force. You thought we were weak. You thought we would submit. You were wrong about us. We do not forgive and we do not forget. The screen behind Hayes showed a list of coordinates, 6 star systems. All of them were major council worlds. These are our next targets, Hayes said. I am telling you exactly where we will strike. I am giving you time to evacuate civilians. I am showing you more mercy than you showed the crew of the Horizon's Edge. But make no mistake, we will hit these targets. We will continue hitting targets until you surrender, or until you are broken completely. Hayes leaned forward slightly. His eyes were hard as diamonds. You started this war to put humanity in its place. Now you will learn what happens when you push us too far. Now you will understand why you should have left us alone. This is only the beginning. What you saw today is mercy compared to what comes next if you continue this war. The broadcast ended. The human fleet jumped to hyperspace and vanished. On Zexus Prime, the fires burned for days. The Vextar counted their dead and assessed the damage. Nearly 40,000 military personnel killed. Every major military installation destroyed. An entire defense fleet shattered. And this was just the first strike. In the council chambers, the emergency session lasted 18 hours. The Vextar demanded immediate retaliation. The Krathis promised their fleets would crush the humans. The Luminary calculated odds and looked at the numbers with growing concern. But already reports were coming in from the 6 systems Hayes had named. Human fleets were moving into position. Phantom ships were being detected near orbital platforms. The humans were making good on their promise. Commander Zexthul stood among the wreckage of his flagship and stared at the stars. He had started this by ordering the attack on the Horizon's Edge. He had thought it would be a simple message. Kill some humans and remind them of their place. Instead, he had unleashed something terrible. He had given humanity a reason to stop pretending to be civilized. He had shown them that the Council would murder their innocents without hesitation, and now humanity was responding with a fury that the galaxy had never seen. The Council had been in power for 10,000 years. They had crushed rebellions and put down uprisings. They had never faced an enemy like this. They had never fought a species that prepared for war while smiling diplomatically. They had never encountered a foe that was willing to burn the galaxy down rather than submit. Zexthul finally understood the magnitude of his mistake. He had not sent a message at Kepler Station. He had signed the Council's death warrant, and there was no taking it back now. 3 months into the war and the galaxy was burning, Admiral Hayes had made good on every promise. The 6 systems he named were hit within 2 weeks of the Zexus Prime attack. Then 6 more, then a dozen beyond that. Human fleets appeared without warning, struck their targets with surgical precision and vanished before Council reinforcements could arrive. Every attack was devastating. Every attack was calculated to destroy military capability, while giving civilians time to evacuate. Humanity still held that line. They were not monsters like the Council had been at Kepler Station, but they were absolutely relentless. The Council's response had been chaos from the start. The Vextar wanted immediate revenge, but their fleets were scattered and demoralized. The Krathis gathered their forces for a massive counteroffensive that never seemed to launch. The Luminary calculated and recalculated the odds while their own worlds came under attack. The elder races had fought rebellions before, but never a real war. They had no experience fighting an enemy that was their equal or better. Commander Susan Wright's intelligence network had infiltrated Council communications so deeply that human commanders often knew enemy fleet movements before Council admirals did. Every encrypted message was broken. Every secret meeting was monitored. Every strategic decision was anticipated. The Council was fighting blind while humanity saw everything. Captain Jake Morrison commanded the 7th Strike Squadron now. His reputation had grown with every mission. The Council put a bounty on his head worth more than some planets. He wore it like a medal. His squadron consisted of 12 fast attack ships built for hit-and-run operations deep in enemy territory. They were ghosts in the void, appearing from nowhere and vanishing before defenders could respond. Morrison's crew had become legendary alongside him. Lieutenant Kyle Parker could put a railgun slug through a target the size of a door from 1,000 kilometers away. Lieutenant Amy Foster navigated through asteroid fields and debris clouds at speeds that made veteran pilots nervous. Chief Engineer Ben Clark kept their mental stealth systems running far beyond their design limits. They were the best crew Morrison had ever worked with, and he trusted them with his life every single day. The squadron's latest mission took them to a Vextar supply depot in the outer reaches. Intelligence indicated the depot supplied 3 Council fleets operating in human territory. Destroying it would cripple enemy operations for months. The depot was defended by 20 warships and a network of automated defense satellites. Morrison brought his squadron in from the dark side of the system. They drifted on minimal power, cold and silent as chunks of ice. The stealth coating absorbed active sensor sweeps. To the Vextar defenders, they were invisible. Weapons range in 30 seconds, Kyle reported quietly. All ships hold fire until my mark, Morrison said into the squadron channel. They drifted closer. The Vextar depot grew larger on their screens. Massive storage tanks held fuel and ammunition. Repair facilities serviced damaged ships. Barracks housed thousands of personnel. It was a small city floating in space. Mark, Morrison said. 12 ships opened fire simultaneously. Missiles and railgun rounds struck the depot from 6 different angles. The automated defenses tried to respond, but they were targeting ghosts. By the time they located the real threats, half the depot was already burning. The Vextar warships scrambled to intercept, but Morrison's squadron was already moving. Amy Foster plotted exit vectors that took them through the debris field. Kyle Parker fired as they ran, hitting pursuing ships with perfect accuracy. Within 10 minutes, the squadron had jumped to hyperspace and vanished. Behind them, the supply depot was the expanding cloud of wreckage. 3 months of supplies gone. Repair facilities destroyed. Over 5,000 Vextar personnel dead or missing. It was another blow to Council logistics and another demonstration that nowhere in their space was safe. But the war was taking its toll on humanity too. The Council had finally started coordinating their responses. Krathis battle groups began hitting human colonies on the frontier. They had abandoned their pretense of following warfare conventions. They targeted civilian transports and settlements. They wanted to break human morale the same way humanity was breaking theirs. The colony world of New Boston received warning of an approaching Krathis fleet with only 6 hours' notice. Governor Linda Shaw had 3 million colonists to evacuate and not nearly enough transport ships. She made the hardest decision of her life. Priority went to children and their parents. Everyone else would have to wait for the second wave. Commander Peter Grant commanded the Colony Defense Force. 30 ships against a Krathis battle group of 200. He knew it was suicide, but he also knew every minute he bought meant more civilians could escape. His ships formed a defensive line between the colony and the approaching enemy. The battle lasted 18 hours. Grant's ships fought with everything they had. They used every trick, every tactic, every desperate maneuver to slow the Krathis' advance. Ships that ran out of ammunition rammed enemy vessels. Damaged ships with dying crews made final runs to take out one more target. They died one by one, but they did not break. Captain Morrison's squadron arrived with reinforcements when Grant was down to his last 5 ships. The colony's orbital facilities were rubble. The defense force was shattered. But every single civilian had been evacuated. All 3 million of them were safely away. Morrison's ships and the reinforcement fleet drove the Krathis back. The enemy had taken heavy losses and their momentum was broken. They withdrew to regroup. New Boston was saved, but the cost had been terrible. Commander Grant survived, but 25 of his 30 ships were destroyed. Over 4,000 defenders were dead. The incident at New Boston sent shockwaves through human space. The Council had proven they would kill civilians without hesitation. There could be no negotiated peace. There could be no compromise. This was a war of extinction. Either humanity would win, or humanity would cease to exist. Admiral Hayes understood this better than anyone. He stood in the war room aboard the Retribution and studied the tactical maps. The Council was finally coordinating their forces. They were pooling resources from all member races. The numerical advantage was still theirs by a significant margin. Humanity could keep hitting them with raids and strikes, but eventually, the Council would mass enough strength to push into human core. Systems. Earth itself could be threatened if this war dragged on too long. Hayes needed to force a decisive engagement, something so devastating that the Council would have no choice but to surrender. He pulled up schematics of the Apex, the massive space station that served as the Council's seat of government. It orbited the neutral world of Concordia and was the symbolic heart of Council power. Every member race had representatives there. Every major decision was made there. If he could take the Apex, he could end the war. The plan began to take shape in his mind. It would require every available ship. It would require perfect timing and coordination. It would be the largest military operation in human history, and if it failed, Earth would be vulnerable to counterattack. Hayes called for an emergency meeting of his senior commanders. Morrison was recalled from the outer reaches. Colonel Nathan Price came up from Special Operations. Commander Susan Wright brought her latest intelligence reports. Dozens of other officers who had become hardened by months of brutal warfare gathered around the holographic display. "We are going to attack the apex," Hayes announced without preamble. The room fell silent. Everyone understood what that meant. The apex was the most heavily defended location in Council space. Taking it would require everything humanity had. "This is insane," one officer said. "This is necessary," Hayes replied. "The Council is finally getting organized. If we give them time to fully coordinate their forces, they will overwhelm us through sheer numbers. We need to end this war now while we still have the advantage of initiative and surprise." Morrison studied the tactical display. The apex was surrounded by defense platforms and had a permanent fleet of over 800 ships. "It would be the bloodiest battle of the war by far. When do we launch?" Morrison asked. Hayes looked at each officer in turn. 3 weeks. That gives us time to gather every available ship and prepare the operation. We will hit them during a full Council assembly session. Every member race will be present. Every Council fleet will be within response range. We will face everything they have." "And if we win?" Colonel Price asked. "Then we cut the head off the snake and force their surrender," Hayes said. "And if we lose, at least we go down fighting on our terms." The vote was unanimous. Operation Broken Crown was approved. Humanity would stake everything on one massive assault. Win or lose, the war would be decided in the space around the apex. The human fleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation around the apex station. Over 500 ships appeared at once like an iron fist, closing around the throat of the Council. Admiral Richard Hayes stood on the bridge of the UES Retribution at the center of the Armada. Every ship humanity could spare was here. Every resource had been committed to this single moment. This was the battle that would decide everything. The Council's defense fleet responded instantly. Over 800 ships representing a dozen species scrambled to intercept. The Luminaries' crystalline dreadnoughts that could focus energy weapons with devastating precision. The Vextar's sleek destroyers built for speed and maneuverability. The Krathys' massive battleships that could take incredible punishment and keep fighting. It was the greatest military force ever assembled in galactic history. 2 fleets faced each other across the void. For a moment there was silence. Then both sides opened fire at once and space itself seemed to explode with violence. The battle began with the largest exchange of fire the galaxy had ever witnessed. Energy weapons lit up the darkness like artificial suns. Missiles streaked through the void by the thousands. Railgun rounds moved at a fraction of light speed and punched through shields like paper. Ships on both sides died in the first minute of combat. Explosions bloomed in chains as magazines detonated and reactors went critical. Captain Jake Morrison led his 7th Squadron into the chaos. His mission was to disable the Apex's defense platforms before they could bring their heavy weapons to bear on the main fleet. Lieutenant Amy Foster threaded the Defiant through a maze of fire that should have been impossible to navigate. Ships exploded around them. Debris filled space, but Amy never hesitated and never slowed. Lieutenant Kyle Parker worked his targeting console with deadly precision. Each shot from the Defiant's railguns struck a defense platform's weak point. One by one, the platforms went dark. Morrison's squadron worked in perfect coordination despite the madness around them. They had trained for this. They had fought together for months. They trusted each other completely. Chief Engineer Ben Clark kept their systems running at 130% capacity. Warning alarms screamed throughout the ship, but Ben ignored them. He rerouted power, bypassed safeties, and pushed every system past its breaking point. The Defiant was performing beyond anything its designers thought possible. But the real shock came when Colonel Nathan Price's special operations teams activated. For months, they had been infiltrating Council space and positioning assets in key locations. Now, simultaneously across a dozen Council systems, sabotage operations began. Shipyards lost power and went offline. Supply depots exploded from inside. Communication networks crashed. Military bases found their defense grids disabled. The Council fleet around the apex suddenly found itself blind and isolated. Individual ships could still fight, but there was no coordination. Captains had to make decisions without orders from their command structure. Some charged forward aggressively. Some held defensive positions. Some tried to retreat and regroup. There was no unified strategy anymore. Admiral Hayes pressed the advantage immediately. The human fleet fought with coordination that came from endless drilling and perfect intelligence. Commander Susan Wright monitored the battle from her station aboard the Retribution and fed real-time analysis to every ship in the fleet. She identified weak points in enemy formations. Before the Council commanders even realized they existed, she predicted movements and redirected fire to maximum effect. Human ships moved like dancers in a carefully choreographed performance. Damaged vessels fell back behind screening ships. Fresh units rotated into the front lines. Ammunition and supplies were shared between ships through daring transfer operations in the middle of battle. The fleet functioned as a single organism with hundreds of parts all working toward one goal. The Council fleet outnumbered the humans, but they were fighting as individuals. Vextor captains competed for glory. Krathis commanders refused to follow Luminari tactical suggestions. Ancient rivalries and cultural differences emerged under pressure. The alliance that had held the Council together for 10,000 years began to crack. 6 hours into the battle, the tide had turned. The Council fleet was broken into scattered groups. Over 300 of their ships were destroyed or disabled. The Apex's shields were failing under sustained bombardment from human dreadnoughts. Morrison's squadron had cleared most of the defense platforms. The human fleet maintained formation and pressed forward relentlessly. Admiral Hayes opened a channel to the Council chambers inside the Apex. His image appeared on every screen in every Council ship and broadcast across the entire galaxy. Every species in known space could see him. Every being watching understood this was the moment that would define the future. Members of the Galactic Council, Hayes began. His voice carried the weight of all the human dead and all the suffering his people had endured. You shed human blood at Kepler Station to send a message. You murdered 33 civilians to teach us our place. You declared war on humanity without provocation and without mercy. Behind him, through the viewport, the Apex's shields collapsed completely. Human ships moved into final firing positions around the massive station. Weapons locked on. One word from Hayes and the station would be reduced to atoms. You signed your own doom the moment you spilled human blood. Hayes continued. Every life lost, every world scarred, every ship destroyed in this war is the price of your arrogance. You thought we were weak. You thought we would submit. You believed we would accept our place in your galaxy. Captain Morrison's squadron took up positions around the Council chambers themselves. His weapons were armed and ready. Every Council representative inside could see human warships through their windows. You were wrong about us, Hayes said. His voice was cold as the void. Humanity does not forgive. We do not forget. We do not surrender. You wanted to teach us a lesson. Instead, you learned one. You learned what happens when you push us too far. Inside the Apex, Council representatives looked at each other in shock and horror. The Luminary calculated the odds of survival if Hayes gave the fire order. The calculations were not favorable. The Vextar prepared to make final stands that would mean nothing. The Krathis realized their strength meant nothing when they were already beaten. Commander Zexthul himself was inside the Apex. He had been summoned to answer for his role in starting the war. Now he watched through the windows as human ships surrounded the station. He saw the weapons pointed at him. He understood that his decision at Kepler Station had brought them to this moment. He had started this by killing humans. Now humans were about to finish it. This ends now, Hayes declared. You will surrender unconditionally. You will disband your fleets and release all territory taken during this war. You will pay reparations to every human family that lost someone because of your actions. These terms are not negotiable. The Vextar representative tried to protest. Hayes cut him off immediately. You have 1 hour to accept these terms, Hayes said. His eyes were hard as diamonds and cold as death. If you refuse, I will destroy the Apex and everyone inside it. Then we will systematically dismantle every Council world until you submit or cease to exist. We will fight for 100 years if necessary. We will burn the galaxy to ash before we let you destroy us. The channel closed. The human fleet held position with weapons hot. Every gun was aimed at the Apex. Every ship was ready to fire on command. The wait began. Inside the Council chambers, chaos erupted. The Luminary argued for immediate surrender. The Krathis demanded they fight to the death. The Vextar tried to negotiate for better terms. But as they argued, reports came in from across Council space. Human fleets were positioned at every major world. Colonel Price's sabotage operations had crippled their ability to resist. Commander Wright's intelligence network had compromised every system. The Council had lost and everyone knew it. 53 minutes after Hayes's ultimatum, the Council transmitted their unconditional surrender. The war was over. Humanity had won. Admiral Hayes stood on the bridge of the Retribution and felt the weight of 3 months of war lift from his shoulders. Around him, his crew cheered. Across the fleet, celebrations erupted on every ship. They had done the impossible. They had defeated the greatest military power in galactic history. Captain Morrison sat on the bridge of the Defiant and thought about Grace Palmer and Danny, Cruz and Lisa Kent. He thought about the 33 crew members who died at Kepler Station. They had not died for nothing. Their deaths had awakened humanity's fury, and that fury had changed the galaxy forever. The treaty was signed 3 months later on the ruins of the old council. A new galactic coalition was formed with proportional representation. Humanity took a leading role because they had proven themselves the most capable military power in known space. The elder races who had looked down on humans for 2 centuries now looked at them with respect and fear. The 33 crew members of the Horizon's Edge were honored with a memorial on Earth. Their names were carved in stone so future generations would remember. Remember that humanity could be peaceful and diplomatic. But remember also that when human blood was shed unjustly, humanity would respond with fire and fury that could break empires. The Council had thought they were teaching humanity a lesson at Kepler Station. Instead, they learned one themselves. Never mistake human civility for weakness. Never believe that humans will simply accept injustice. Never shed human blood without expecting total war in return. The galaxy had changed forever. The elder races would never again underestimate the youngest species among the stars. And humanity would never forget the day the Council made their terrible mistake. The day they shed human blood and signed their own doom.